Hello, I'm Joanne Gallagher, your Think.Future podcast host. Today, Dennis Truax joins the program from his home in Mississippi, United States. Dennis is an engineer who has worked across academia, industry, consulting and government, and he joins us to discuss the value of water in the built environment and how best to manage and optimize water and wastewater systems. Join us in a minute to find out more. This podcast is brought to you by Arcons, a global leader pioneering solutions and services to the AEC and manufacturing industries who support digital transformation for the built environment and smart manufacturing. Visit arcons.net to learn more about how Arcons are helping organizations design, build and solve through digitalization. From Arcons to you, welcome to our Think Future podcast series. Each week we'll share conversations with industry leaders from around the world to find out how they're thinking future. Subscribe to Arcons Think Future for access to more episodes, interviews and profiles. Dr. Dennis Truax is professionally certified as an environmental and a water resource engineer. He has worked around the world developing water supply systems, protecting watersheds, managing waste, and helping establish policies for management of water as a sustainable resource. Dennis recently completed his term as president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, having promoted workforce development, sustainable and resilient infrastructure, and policies to address water management for a changing planet. Welcome to the program, Dennis.
Hi, Joanne.
Dennis, please tell us about your academic background, your industry experience, and understanding of government approaches within the water management space.
Okay. From an academic standpoint, I spent 41 years on the faculty at Mississippi State University in what ultimately became the Rula School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And in the last 15 years, I was the administrative head, the directors, which we would call it, of the program. Responsibilities included, of course, academic administration, development, instruction, research, faculty development. And that also led to my engagement in a lot of ways with regulatory communities. I sat on several state water committees, councils, as well as hazardous waste, and served the state in developing rules and regulations with regard to things most focused on wastewater treatment, stormwater management, and spill containment. On the industrial side, during those 41 years, I also had a parallel career consulting. I've worked on some 550 plus water and wastewater treatment plants around the world. I had moved into a manufacturing company that focused in aeration equipment that was used in both water, wastewater, water supply, water management areas. That equipment business I had for about 10 years, and that took me around the world as well. And so between academia, industry, government, I've worked in kind of a little bit of everything with regard to the water area, as well as some other areas.
Well, that is an amazing experience and expertise you're bringing to our audience. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, no, thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
What does valuing water mean to you?
Let me frame it first by saying that my program, my academic program, my undergraduate program, also branched out at Mississippi State. And we had various events on campus to try and raise the awareness of the importance of water. And that starts off by really defining water as a valuable commodity. There's a lot of people that take water for granted. And we're coming to a point where that's no longer possible. I guess the most poignant example that I have is the work I did with the Engineers Without Borders in southern Zambia. We ended up, by the end of our 5-year mission, we had put in 9 potable water wells, hand pumps, repaired another 3, and in doing so, we had brought sustainable fresh water to about 10,000 people. And in comparison, these people were either having to travel 15 to 20 kilometers every day or two in order to get enough water for their families, their community, small villages, 5 or 6 families, 30, 40 people, and unfortunately, in the extreme, they were having to send their children off. And most importantly, because of the nature of the culture, what they would do is they'd send the girls. Young lady, age 4, be handed a 20-liter jerry can and told to go forth and bring water home. By the time she brought it home, that was enough water to get through the day. And the next day, she was handed that can again and off again. And she would carry that water day in and day out, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, regardless of climate. And if she wasn't killed or raped or kidnapped, by the time she got to 15 or 16, then she moved and effectively was married off to somebody who effectively used her the same way. Very oppressive in that regard. And by putting water in place, defining the value, by putting water in place, these young ladies were able to get into education. These young ladies became more entrepreneurial than the men and developed crafts and revenue streams that enhanced the quality of life. Worked in another community where it was the children that went off and lost half a day of school because of the distance they had to travel. And so half the day was spent getting water and half the day was trying to educate them. The community was poor, impoverished, isolated. And after we put in the water well that we did, we went back the next year and they had goats and sheep and cattle and crops, and they were clean and looked healthy. And at another well, I asked the coordinator, the community leader, I said, what's the biggest issue that you think the well has brought? And his answer is, we're not sick all the time. We were routinely having some kind of a gastrointestinal disease, a parasite, diarrhea, whatever, almost every month, routinely, because of the supply that they were using. And that ended. And so they became healthier and more productive. So it's economic development, it's human health, it's community well-being, it's quality of life issues. And people that have water without the threat of losing it really struggle to understand just how important water is to every aspect of our lives. That's what I define as value.
Wow, they're powerful stories. Thanks for sharing.
Life-changing. Absolutely. In fact, the students I would take with me to the person has been changed. Their life careers, their value sets, just the way they look at the United States, having come home, changed as a result of these trips.
Well, that is the real value of water. And it's amazing how many people in today's world don't have that yet. So
right.
We need to do something about it.
Well, and I have a suggestion. It's something we do on campus. I'm not saying everybody participates, but we put together a program, and this is just an adaptation of what's already out there. On World Water Day, we call it a day without water. Get up, pick a day, and we always recommend a day because that everybody shares the pain. Pick a day and use no water. That means get up, and when you flush the toilet, don't flush it. Use it, but don't flush it. Don't take a shower. Brush your teeth, but don't use water. Don't have that morning cup of coffee. Think about what you're eating for breakfast, or for that matter, skipping breakfast because you can't use water. And go through the entire day avoiding the use of water. And you do that for 12 hours, you'll be one thirsty puppy. And it really does have a positive impact on the students that we engage through that process. Giving it up just for one day, it's not going to kill you. You can live 2 weeks without sustainable water. But at the same time, just realizing all the different facets of your life that are impacted in a positive way because you have clean water readily available.
That's right. Awareness. When I drink my first glass of water in the morning, I thank God for the clean water that's coming through my tap. I do that as part of my practice.
Well, you should thank an engineer, but God gave us the knowledge.
Yeah, thank an engineer. That's right. I should thank an engineer that water is clean.
Well, and I would also frame it, Joanne, to say that, really, who is the greatest engineer of all times? Well, God.
Yeah.
I mean, God was the original engineer, our creator. We're just replicating everything thereafter.
That's right.
We'll claim him anyway.
Whatever God is for people, I mean, it's different for everyone.
Yes.
So concerning, the World Green Building Council's new publication,
yes,
I believe you've had a chance to read that. Our Cons is a partner with World Green Building Council, and myself and others on the program, their accelerator program, we're contributing to this. And I just really would like some feedback. What did you think of the publication? And if you'd like to go into the 4 challenges that it highlights.
Absolutely. If I may, let me start off by saying that I think it's not complete. And I'll explain why after we talk about the 4 challenges they identify. I think there's a 5th challenge that they missed. It is an excellent document to read. It is certainly thought-provoking. They identify 4 areas: scarcity, equity, greenhouse emissions, and then resilience to climate change. And with regard to scarcity, I think probably most of your listeners by now understand that while 70% of the earth is water, only about 3% of that water is fresh water, which means ready to consume, ready to use, but less than 1% of all of the water is readily accessible. The rest is frozen or subterranean or whatever. So roughly 0.7% is something that we can get to and sustain life on this planet. And recognizing that the population on this planet and our lifestyle on this planet has gotten to a point where we're overusing the resources that are available. Equity, access, quality are all important. You got to recognize, as I did in working in Zambia, that about a third of the world's population doesn't have access to a sufficient supply of clean water to support health and economic development. And I tie the 2 together. I mean, you have to have a way to support your life, but you also have to live in a healthy way. And so drinking water, how you deal with and use water, which I know we'll talk a little bit later, it's just not there for a lot of people. And that isn't fair. There's not a lot you can do about it other than engage and make impact. But recognizing the value of wet water in all aspects of life. And that, again, in terms of equity, about a third of the population just doesn't have that opportunity without outside help. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you establish a water system, our more established water systems, the ones that are 50, 70 years old, more importantly, 100 years old or older, leakage losses, squandering the water by not maintaining the infrastructure needed and making sure that it gets to people. I'm working in Ecuador right now, and the community, there's people in the community, about 300 people, where they have all the water they want and it runs across the ground and they water their vegetable gardens with it. And the person literally next door can't get a drop. They have to come out of their house and walk because the infrastructure is so bad. It leaks so bad. It was designed so poorly that it creates an artificial inequity in the community. And we're working with them to try and correct that problem through combinations of policy, infrastructure advancement, redevelopment, and expansion. But, in the U.S., for example, we lose anywhere upwards of 30 to 40%. I know some communities at least lose 50% of the water that they pump, treat, stick in storage, and distribute before it ever makes it to a person's tap. That is unconscionable, and it can easily be resolved. Third piece that was mentioned in the guide, the report, was greenhouse gas emissions. There's 2 aspects here. First off, you got to realize that when we have to pump water out of the ground or out of a surface water supply to a treatment plant, energy is used. And then the treatment process, whatever it is, the production of the chemicals, the operation of the treatment plant, the testing that's involved, the storage, all involves energy in some capacity. And then once we have it finished and ready for distribution, sell to the customer, if you want to think of it in a commercial sense, or distribution to the public in a more municipal sense. You pump it again. So there's more energy. And then when you finish using it at the house or the industry or the commerce building, whatever it is, you pump it again and treat it again and then discharge it in the environment is the classic linear model. And it's wrong. We just are using energy as if it's a necessity without thinking about the options. Treatment plant I worked on, we had the opportunity to come in. We pumped the water once, brought it into the plant. We had to lift it up and we changed the way the plant was designed so that once we pumped it into the facility to the point that it went through all the treatment processes, went out through the final process into the storage facility, it was never pumped again. And the equipment we used had low energy impact, high efficiency motors, high efficiency equipment, optimized systems to minimize. We were actually trying to minimize cost because energy has a dollar value to it. And indirectly, of course, we were having a positive impact on the greenhouse emissions that would be associated with that. The other aspect, of course, of the greenhouse emissions in homes and businesses is what we do with the water once it arrives. Rarely does water arrive at the tap and then get used. It gets stored, but more importantly, I think, and this is one I've argued against, I guess is the way to put it, for decades, at least in the United States. The vast majority of homes have these 50 to 75 to 100 gallon hot water heaters that sit there and keep 50 to 100 gallons of water hot and ready to use on an instant. Why? We got to rethink the way we use or treat water, both individually and collectively, in the home, in the industry, in the community. The fourth area that they mentioned in their report is resilience and climate change. And their point, and right on mark, roughly 90% of all the disasters in the world have a water-related component to that disaster, whether it be a hurricane or a flood or a levee break or a dam break or whatever it may be.
Yeah, great. Dennis, you mentioned that there's a fifth challenge. Could you please describe what that is?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. National security. First and foremost, national security. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has defined water scarcity and inequity in the distribution of water resources as probably the most important aspect of national security or threat to national security. When I was working in Turkey 20 years ago, I was hearing then about the inequities in water just on the Asian versus European sides of that part of the world, and how some adjacent countries were really desperate to get water, and some of the things they were talking about in order to get water. So national security, that because it's so essential to everything we've talked about, quality of life, health, economic development, monetary relationships, I think national security is enough of a motivator of its own, not that the other four aren't. And I'd like to see the document talk a little bit about that.
Yes, the document was really focused on the built environment, which does, of course, feed into the bigger system. The nation's security is part of that. So Dennis, obviously the current model that we have, the linear model, is unsustainable, and you've just explained why. Is there another way to do this, a circular approach to water? And if so, how would you describe that?
That's going to be a tough nut to crack, but it's one that we can address. I think it's a process of paradigm shift and application of technology. Let me jump to paradigm first. When people think about water, when I think about water, in fact, going back to what you'd said at the beginning, Joanne, in effect, saying grace over that first glass of water in the morning, recognize that what you're thinking is that the water's safe to drink and that it represents that quality of life. Well, we use water for sanitation, and we use water to impact that quality of life and help protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. There's nothing wrong with that, but the water we use for that doesn't necessarily have to be drinking water. We may be able to do a lot of that with water that has been used before. So reusing water, recycling water, which is a little lower choice. Anytime you go from reuse to recycling, there's more greenhouse gases emitted. So if you can reuse it directly, that's great. We're thinking in a non-linear way, but thinking circularly, how to use that water, how to achieve the same life quality goals without having to basically use twice as much or 3 times as much water. Paradigm. I think it's the first piece. In terms of technology, we're already to the point where we can build structures that help treat the water naturally. With, in fact, using natural biota, not only can we treat the water, whether it be stormwater or rainwater, if you want to think of it that way, or wastewater, and produce a gray water with it, or produce a feedstock for a mechanical treatment plant in the home that brings it to potable level. That's not tough technology. We've been able to do that for 20 years. We have to get past the paradigm, though, that I'm using my wastewater or my crap or whatever, however you want to frame it. That idea that this is the water that I just flushed down the toilet, I got to get past that. I got to think of water in a more holistic sense. And that technology will help me do that if people will have faith in the technology. Let's say the technology has been around for 20 years. The robustness of that technology, membranes, chemical treatment, and the like, absorptive properties. There's a number of different strategies that can be done. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I actually have a point of use water system simply because I'm concerned about the lead in the water that's being supplied to me. I'm worried about the bacteria that's in the water that's being supplied to me. And I have a point of use system that addresses all of that. A simple system, relatively low cost, capital, almost no energy cost. The only time it does anything is when I turn it on, and that's for small quantities of water. So it's really a matter of looking at technology to achieve the goals for sanitation and quality, and then start using water in a more circular way with a focus on minimizing the amount of energy we have to put back into it in order to reuse it.
So design of water circular systems is also part of it, like the Eco-Village network.
Mm-hmm.
They have their homes designed, for example, an Earthship. They have an inside garden. They're using black water and gray water, and they're doing many functions with the same water that came from the sink that goes to the plants and it goes to,
yes,
outside to the. So this is what you're really talking about. Maybe you could explain what black water, gray water, all these classes of water are, and when you use what, and so it's natural and safe for people to start thinking this way.
Yeah. Well, for those who haven't delved into it, of course, potable water is the water that's fit to drink. That's drinking water. Gray water is water that is not fit for consumption, but is clean enough for a number of uses. Gray water can be used for flushing toilets repeatedly. Gray water can be used for other activities where direct human consumption of the water is minimized because this water hasn't gone through a treatment phase to the point where pathogens, most importantly, and other contaminants, I'll say, have been lowered to the point where we're not worried about human health impact. And then your black water, of course, is what you're generating in many cases. This is the water that's highly contaminated. It's the water that is the feedstock for the treatment process or the mechanism or the plant life that is taking that black water and converting it over to gray water, which then can be used as a feedstock for potable water, or it can be used directly for a lot of things that we use water for.
Thanks for explaining that. So then that leads me into the question, how do you manage the resistance to using recycled water in the public domain, the perceptions around it?
Well, the academician in me would say education. The education process is one in which you have to develop confidence that the processes do what we contend they do. I remember and I'm sure this didn't make it to you, probably didn't make it outside of the region I was working at the time. I remember there being a debate about a water reclamation plan out of Denver, which was a direct reuse plant, taking wastewater, treating it to a high level, and putting it right back into consumption. And there was an administrator out there who said, I absolutely believe that this is safe, and took a glass of water and drank it on the cameras in front of everybody. I've seen this happen in other places as well. I know this is safe. Let me show you how sure I am that it's safe by using it. We're going to have to change the idea that's resistance. We're going to have to open people up. That means they're going to have to trust the professionals, but we also have to be trustworthy. We have to make sure that what we're doing does achieve those standards. And I think as we move through this process, the other piece of that education is to point out the fact that they may not have a choice, that they live potentially in an area where the availability of water may go away or become restricted. And they may not want to live with the restrictions. So as such, they need to change the way they think about water and that resistance to how recycled water is using. I worked in the West on a project, and it was actually remarkable how accepting people were in using gray water for a number of activities that they would otherwise have used fresh water for, or potable water for. Watering golf courses. Of course, golf courses are a whole nother argument. I'm not going to get into that one. But the idea was here was something they were going to use water for. Why not gray water? Agriculture, irrigation. I spent 10 years working in the winery industry, and we used gray water to water the vines through a drip irrigation system. So the water wasn't coming in contact with the food supply, the grapes, but they were coming in contact with the roots in such a way that the water needs for the grapes were met without having to use any additional water. In fact, the water we were treating was processed water from the manufacturing of the wine, and treating it in ample supply and quantity to not just do that, but also fight fires, and also maintain property and water lawns and do a whole bunch of other things. So they're just really thinking a new way with regard to water, and then getting the acceptance that goes with it. The western part of the United States is much more amenable to this.
We'll be back to the conversation in just a minute. In the meantime, here's a little more about Arcons. Arcons has a mission to advance the efficiency, quality and profitability of project outcomes for its customers by providing best-in-class technology and services. If you're looking for a digitalization and sustainability-focused partner to help you achieve your goals, join the thousands of AEC and manufacturing customers globally who have turned to Arcons to start their journey toward a better built environment and smarter manufacturing. With more than 50 locations around the world, Arcons can connect you to the right technologies and expertise so you can improve your competitive position and increase profitability. Arcons has an industry expert to help you navigate the best pathway forward wherever you are on your digitalization and sustainability journey. Visit arcons.net to find out more. And now back to our conversation. So, what is the current status of the debate in the US concerning regulation and policy around using cloud seeding technologies?
That's a great question. Based on what I know, cloud seeding is basically isolated to about 8 states in the US. And those 8 states are doing it in a way that accelerates or enhances the amount of snowfall that falls in the upper mountains as a way of enhancing their water supply. The good news is that by doing it during that period of year, the impacts of taking water from what would be leeward or downwind communities or states is minimized. But in reading through the literature on cloud seeding, you will find that the U.S. government stopped doing any kind of investigations in this dating back to the early 1980s, and that the 8 states that are paying to have cloud seeding done have zero data today that shows it actually makes any difference at all. So they're spending millions and millions of dollars to seed the clouds, and there's really no evidence that shows that they're getting a substantial amount of additional snowfall, which they would then convert into drinking water. There's got to be a lot of science there, but I do know that when I was growing up years ago, there was a move to do some cloud seeding in my area, and I grew up in Maryland, in the Appalachian Range, and they were talking about cloud seeding to try and enhance agriculture. But what was happening was, what they quickly realized was that if they forced the rain out of the clouds in one location, it meant that there was no rain someplace else. So all they were doing was causing an inequity. And so there's got to be a lot of study on whether or not this, would ever be used in any kind of environment other than what they're doing right now. And I'm not sure the states out west are going to continue to do this if they can't find some real meaningful data to justify it.
There's a lot of cloud seeding technologies and companies on the US stock market. So that's why I was interested, because I'm not sure how regulated it is. And as you as an engineer understand, if you press the system, the flows of the system in one way or another, they're going to affect the whole cycle of the water on the planet.
Yes.
Is that true? Is that a reasonable assumption to make?
Absolutely true. Again, go back to what I said. If I can get it to rain at point A, it means point B downwind isn't going to get that rain. It's not going to get that moisture. For that matter, it may not even get the clouds that it may need in order to maintain the habitat or quality of life or the water supply. So it cannot be done within the boundaries of any one geographic or geopolitical area. It's got to be done on a comprehensive basis, and you are 100% correct. At this point in time, the U.S. isn't doing anything. It's really a matter of businesses trying to sell the technology. It's just that the cost can be prohibitive, and the benefit has yet to be defined.
When it comes to national security, if companies that are very wealthy have access to this technology and others don't, and you can move the water system around to suit your economic benefit, that could impact people and populations and health, and it can be a national security issue, as you pointed out.
Yes. And it's the greatest threat would be in the West Coast, again, because you have large corporations that are focused on food production, and they would argue that food production would be a justifiable reason for, I'm going to use the term, stealing the water from some other place. But to this point in time, the West Coast is basically accepted or focused on using surface water supplies and reallocation of the surface water supplies. In fact, there's two major projects underway right now that are focused on redistributing surface water so that the need for alternative supplies, either ground or cloud seeding or some form of augmentation, isn't needed. Again, I would argue they also need to be looking at reuse and recycling. There's an awful lot of population out there that could be taking the wastewater that's going out into streams and put it directly back into the agricultural market.
Thank you for that, Dennis.
Yeah.
Let's go back into water circularity again. Let's focus on the paradigm shift and assume that we're there and we have technology and we have people like you that are very knowledgeable out there, and we have this idea of circularity. Can you please talk about principles of water circularity that engineers could focus on to solve this problem?
It really kind of goes back to the earlier conversation, is that as an engineer, we need to think about water as a valuable resource. And in that concept, we need to think about water in a non-linear fashion. We need to think about water in a circular fashion, I guess you would call it. But what's meant by that is, from the point of origin, in environmental engineering, we talk about cradle to grave, but from the point of origin, when we first get the water, thinking about ways of minimizing the negative impacts, climate change, greenhouse gases, maximizing the preservation, minimizing leaks, evaporation minimization, containment, treating things effectively, and then when we have the water to the condition we want, using it with as good stewards. And I emphasize to the level we want. Again, if I want to fight a fire, I don't need water capable of being consumed. If I'm watering a yard or if I'm watering an agricultural facility, if I'm manufacturing, I don't necessarily need water that is suitable for human consumption. I can do things to address the health and human safety issue while using partial treatment, minimizing the level of treatment. Again, that's what my one design firm and my manufacturing firm focused on, creating design alternatives that minimized energy use, maximized water use, and found ways of minimizing the losses and maximizing the reuse, the circularity. When we get the water to the point where we dispose of it, of course, we have to be concerned about that disposal and make sure that it doesn't do other types of environmental harm. But we can get there through various steps. We can do that in the home. We can do that in industry. We can do that as a community. And cooperation is a big part of this circular economy. I as one person can do what I can to minimize water waste. But if my community is out there with horrendously leaky pipes and they're squandering the water and throwing it away, my impact's not going to be as much. What I need to be is an advocate for engaging my community to support me in my efforts and support them in their efforts to support this idea of minimizing the amount used. This goes back 30 years in environmental engineering. You minimize, you reuse, then you recycle, and then you look at treatment options. And keeping that in mind with water, I think is going to be essential. And then best use is the other piece. We haven't talked much about that, but best use. What is the best use? Most places say the best use of all the water is for consumption, and I'm not arguing against that, but maybe it's best use for some of the water. Instead of having all of the water brought up to best use standards for one use, again, segregating these waters into best use for client A or use A, B, C, and again, looking at ways of linking these not linearly, but in kind of parallel fashion to maximize the water use and capture the water value.
Thank you. When it comes to that document, the publication, they talk about the 4 scales of the built environment.
Yes.
Supply chain, construction processes, buildings, cities and communities. Out of these, do you see which scale would be the best lever for change, and including like design and collaboration? Where would you start if you were to tackle it? Like, where's the best bang for the buck? Because we are under pressure, literally, and we have cities like Mexico City under severe strain now because they're supposed to run out of water in a few months. Where do you begin in a problem like this?
It's a great question, and you're looking for the greatest impact in the shortest period of time. Of the 4 that you mentioned, for me, it really becomes supply chain. And I push the supply chain because of the losses it involves and the idea that we can take this supply chain and divide the water up for best use. So it may be that it's consumptive use, or it may be for agricultural use, or it may be for even recreational use, just to throw the gambit in. And whatever that best use is, making sure that the supply chain is designed in such a way, in a nonlinear fashion, to allow that to happen. Second piece, the reason I jump on supply chain is it's the one that we can easily control with minimal impact from outside forces. When I develop supply chain, I don't have the community looking over my shoulder. I don't have a particular individual looking over my shoulder, seeing what I'm doing. They're going to be interested in what they get. It's the reason why cities and communities are extremely important. But trying to get that paradigm shift in cities and communities also very difficult. And as such, I'm not saying it's not important, but it's going to be the hardest one to crack in my mind. buildings, you already mentioned, there are standards, and it's not just in a few places. On a global sense, buildings have already started to address this issue. I don't know if you've ever heard of what a urban sequoia is, but this is a concept that was developed by an architect in Great Britain who actually received some awards for developing it. But the urban sequoia is a technique approach has been used in Taiwan and Singapore for over a decade. And it basically says, I build buildings in a way that they are sustainable and respectful to the environment and minimize the use of water. And when I use water, I reclaim that water within the structure of the building. Going back to what we were saying earlier, that building is designed in such a way where it treats the wastewater it generates and returns it for use within its own building. It becomes a closed living entity. And the urban sequoia, if you get into it, not to go too far off the rails, that we're talking about a building that produces its own energy, manages its own environment, provides its own drinking water, manages all the waste and stormwater associated with it, and if designed properly, actually takes upwards of enough carbon dioxide out of the air equivalent to anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 trees, a living building. That's doable now. But the impact on that is going to be somewhat nominal, isolated, because not everybody's building buildings. And then the construction process you mentioned, I think, is also important. Getting people to realize how water is used in construction is a challenge for any combination of reasons. So challenges, opportunities, impact, I think supply chain, because I can do things about it now that have positive impacts now that can minimize the negative impacts now. And that's why I advocate for it as our first best choice.
I just noticed the International Code Council celebrated the World Plumbing Day or World Plumbers Day, acknowledging the role of plumbers in water circularity. Because there's engineers and there's plumbers. The plumbers come in after the thing's designed and keep it running. Do you see a role for them in this as well as stakeholders? They interface with the property owners all the time. What's the role that plumbers could play in the education of the public?
Well, you said it, Joanne. If you go to the average home, certainly not mine, they probably have never met an engineer. They may not even know what an engineer does. They have some big concept. Where I grew up, they thought engineers were the people that drove trains. The plumber, in many ways, can be the front line because they can explain opportunities and explain the importances. Plumbing code is part of that solution. Example I'll give you quickly is that in the late 80s, we had a major drought in the United States. And as a result of that drought, we're talking about multiple year drought. And as a result of that, there were plumbing code changes that reduced the amount of water needed to flush toilets, reduced the amount of water shower heads used, reduced the amount of water that was used in the home. And when the drought was over, nobody took those fixtures and furnishings back out. So they continued to do it. Now those fixtures and furnishings are the standard of the industry, and there's a whole new generation of water-saving devices. And it's going to be the plumber that installs it, makes sure it's installed, and explains the benefits of doing that. So we're all part of the solution. And we talk about engineers as planners, designers, constructors, and maintainers. But I broaden that. You don't have to necessarily have an engineering degree or a license. When I talk about the engineering family, I'm talking about the contractors and the plumbers and the others that are part of building our infrastructure bases.
Great. I'm glad you said that. I think there's a huge opportunity there to educate plumbers because they have this interface with people in their homes, and it's easier to understand when they're standing there watching the plumber do the work.
Yeah, I agree completely. And your scenario is right on track. The idea of trying to convince somebody to go in and replace all their plumbing to be water saving and the cost associated with that, and trying to convince them they would save money in the long run and what the payback is, that's going to be a losing battle. But I've got a toilet that isn't working anymore. I've got a shower that isn't working anymore. I've got a fixture that isn't working anymore. Let's find a better fixture. Let's not replace with kind. Let's replace with better. And that better is a matter of, again, education and opportunity. It is out there.
It is. We talked about, generally the cities that are finding challenges with water, like Mexico City. Are there any other examples that you could provide where it's about demand and not supply?
Sure. Well, let me set up the premise and the earlier document we were talking about. The World Green Building Council talks about it, but not in the same direction that I'm going to take you here for just a second. We have to recognize, based on the information that we've gotten at the American Society of Civil Engineers, which, by the way, we didn't mention, but I'm the 2022 president of ASCE, and I've been involved with ASCE for 30 years. We know that roughly 85% of the people on this planet are going to be living in an urban environment in the next 25 to 30 years. We're already moving in that direction. And we talk about that. We're talking about communities of 25 million people, like Cairo, which is just off. I mean, they've got 21, 22 million people in Cairo right now. And that is not where the water is. People move to urban environments, not because of the natural resources that support life, but because of their perceived economic opportunity. Or maybe it's their security, or maybe it's, pick an answer, whatever. But I promise you it's not because of water resources. So we're concentrating people in areas where resources are limited. So to answer the question more specifically, so West Texas, there's a community that has already run out of water. And what their answer is, at least for the near term, is trucking water from a nearby community in tanker trucks, bringing it to the community, putting it into storage, and then distributing it. And their long-term solution, take a deep breath. I mean, for me, the long-term solution is pack my bags and find another place. But I don't live there, so that's not a fair analogy. Their long-term solution is to put in a pipe from a nearby community that has a small surplus of water and pump it some 16 to 17 miles, 20 to 25 kilometers to get it to the community so they can use it. And they will be ever beholden to that community. I see that in other areas. So that's the kind of one option that you see. The other option, I think, Joanne, which you and I have talked about a little bit offline, is again changing the paradigm about it. The example that I hold up, more so than I guess really anybody, jumping ahead a little bit here, is something that Las Vegas or Nevada did, Reno, Vegas, in that area. And that is that they were talking about the fact that they were running out of water. Hoover Dams is at historically low levels right now. But this is back 20, 25 years ago. And they realized that they were using an awful lot of water to water lawns and wash cars and do those kinds of things. And they went to the people, instead of investing a lot to raise the Hoover Dam so that it had a greater capacity for storage, they went to the people and convinced them to find ways not to use water, take out their green grass and put in xenoscaping rocks and indigenous plants that don't require watering ever, and changing the way they use water and limiting the amount of water that's available and how it was done and making sure it was done in an efficient way, which is fortuitous because, as I've already said, the water level in Hoover Dam is historically low. If they had raised the level of the dam, it would have done nothing to solve their problem because the water's not there to store. And so it's how we rethink it. It's what you're advocating for. It's rethinking how we use water and changing our behavior in a way that as we evolve into a new thought process, a new respect for water, as we move to valuing water in a new way, recognizing that we can change our lifestyle, but without really changing the lifestyles, or it's just a different value set. So trying to anticipate what that natural resource is going to be 15, 20 years from now. Phoenix, for example, Phoenix, Arizona, is already curtailing water. They know today that their current population can't be sustained with the water supply. And yet people are moving into Phoenix all the time. What's the solution? Well, the solution where I worked when I was a young consulting, and I won't mention the community, but it was outside of DC, they actually came in and put a moratorium We're not building houses. I mean, zero home construction, zero commercial construction. We are at our capacity. We have no more water to give. There are no more hookups allowed. And they stayed that way for a long time until they could develop the supply. It wasn't the supply wasn't available. It just hadn't been developed and converted over into a usable form. So, but what about a community that's never going to have that supply? So regulatory involvement, and people aren't going to be happy with that. I tell somebody that all of a sudden nobody else can move into the area. Home prices are going to be impacted. Quality of life is going to be impacted. Business is all of a sudden going to start going someplace else. That's a hard one to do. Again, going back to earlier conversation about cities and communities, that's why I put it kind of last. It's important, but getting that change to happen quickly, difficult.
Wow. No, it's very somber, but it's sobering. We have to think now, or we've got to do something about it. And I encourage everyone to take the publication and read it, everyone in the built environment, in the context of what you said, Dennis. So as we close out today's conversation, when you think future about circularity of water in the built environment, what excites you the most?
Oh, you would think that'd be a tough question. It isn't really. What excites me the most is people like you are having the conversation. By bringing this conversation to the forefront and building a community on a global platform of people with like minds that understand the criticality of what we're talking about, the importance of addressing this problem on like climate change, addressing this problem now, as opposed to trying to address it 15, 20, 25 years from now. Recognizing that we have opportunities, we have capacity, we have technology. We just have to have the will, the fortitude, the vision. And you're sharing vision. And I hope what I've shared with you and the listeners today has provided some augmentation to that vision, or maybe even a foundation for motivation to move forward and advocacy for change. That, to me, is the most exciting thing. 10 years ago, if we'd had this conversation, it'd have been you and me in a bar having the conversation. That's not the case today. We're having this conversation on a global basis. And that, to me, is exciting. Oh,
Dennis, thank you so much for sharing your vast experience and wisdom on the topic of water circularity.
Again, I hope I've added value to the conversation and the investment of your listeners to us for this conversation. I hope they feel that it was worth their time.
It sure has. Thank you so much, Dennis.
You're welcome.
This podcast was brought to you by Arcons. Arcons is leading the digital transformation of the AEC and manufacturing industries by providing best-in-class technology solutions from world-leading partners and their own in-house development software from the Arcons BeSmart portfolio for building, infrastructure, and manufacturing. Arcons is a company that cares about creating and building a better world. Together, we are working with industry and environmental experts, providing forums and platforms through our Arcons Think community to create conversations that matter to our future generations. We invite you to join in the conversation and participate in our Think community. Like and subscribe to Think.Future to stay up to date with the latest innovations and conversations as we advance the digital journey for the AEC and manufacturing around the world. You can download our podcasts at arcons.net or from your favorite podcast platform.